If you're buying plastic or a polyester t-shirt, that can't really provide anything that's good for the world. You're not going to change that into some positive environmental impact because you're extracting oil from the ground to make it. But with natural fibers, they can be managed and grown and harvested in a way that contributes to ecosystems and to livelihoods. And so that potential is there. We just have to change some of those systems.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Have you checked to see what materials your clothing is made out of lately? Recent reports show up to 70% of fabrics used today are made of plastic. What would it look like if we started implementing a more sustainable, natural approach to what we wear, in much the same way as what we do with what we eat? This is episode 386, and our guest today is Meiklejohn. Megan is a sustainability expert in the fashion and manufacturing industries, and she is the Senior Vice President of Supply Chain for Land to Market, an initiative of the Savory Institute. Today, Megan helps us look at our clothing through a new lens. Just as we give much consideration to where our food comes from, it's time to consider where our clothing is sourced from, what it's made of, and whether it's helping or harming the environment and our bodies. Megan covers what we can do as consumers. She weighs in on whether leggings made from water bottles are a good idea or a bad one, for example. And she tells us which brands are actually working on a more sustainable, natural approach to manufacturing clothing. All in all, she helps provide us with something of a clothing compass for making better choices for our individual health and that of the planet with every purchase we make. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to the Wise Traditions Conference happening on October 21st to the 23rd in Knoxville, Tennessee. You guys, it is the conference that nourishes in every way. Amazing speakers include many of the people who've been featured on this podcast, including Brandon LaGreca, Sally Fallon Morell, Dr. Tom Cowan, Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, Stephanie Seneff, and more. You don't want to miss out on the opportunity to meet new friends and enjoy nourishing farm-to-table meals together. I plan on being there too. Join me. There's still time to register. Go to wisetraditions.org and secure your spot today. And a quick thank you to Defender Shield. Defender Shield is the world's #1 EMF radiation protection and shielding company, and they just came out with an innovative line of digital wellness supplements called Light Body that complements their line of EMF shielding products. The idea is to increase our cellular resistance and digital protection from the inside out. Light Body is the next generation of nutritional supplements, and its mission is to transform the body with targeted, research-backed micronutrients that combat environmental toxins. It's made from the highest and purest quality ingredients, formulated specifically to address the issues associated with the modern digital lifestyle, such as EMF radiation, blue light exposure, and other environmental toxins. Light Body is gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, with no added sugar or drugs, and of course, GMO-free as well. And it's bound to help those with MCS, multiple chemical sensitivity, or EHS, electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome, along with those with chronic immune illnesses. So go to defendershield.com today and use the code WISE10 for 10% off at checkout. That's defendershield.com and the code WISE10 for 10% off. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Megan.
Thanks for having me.
So we've all heard of fast food. Talk to us about fast fashion. What is that?
There's a lot of different models out there that are really an example of fast fashion. You know, we see high production of low quality garments that are just in the stores. They're becoming really the biggest option for us as clothing to buy. And I think one of the drivers of that is just our use of synthetic fibers. So of all the fibers that are produced annually to make clothing, around 70% of them are plastic. And the reason is to drive down the cost. Yeah.
Wait a minute. 70% of the fabrics in our clothing are plastic. Are you referring to things like polyester and viscose and stuff like that?
I'm actually not even considering viscose in that number. So it's anything that's petroleum based. So plastic, nylon, acrylic. Those are the three major ones. And spandex.
And we're putting this right against our skin.
Yes, we are. Yes.
And why is it not good for us or the planet?
It's a non-renewable resource, right? We're using fossil fuels and refining them and crude oil to refining that to get to a fiber that we're using to make into fabric and yarn. While we have these other resources that are available to us that are renewable, like plant or an animal. So you have cotton and linen and all these other really interesting fibers like ramie or any your bast fibers that are similar to linen. And then, of course, you have the animal fibers, which is what I'm really interested in. So that would be anything from wool and silk, cashmere, and then other materials like leather and shearling.
Gosh, this really is a parallel with fast food because nature gives us whole real foods, which are amazing and nourishing, and we substitute those with food-like substances. It's like we're doing the same thing with clothing.
It's exactly the same thing. So how I see it is in fashion, we're always trying to get to economies of scale and make things very efficiently. And when we're constantly driving towards lowering the price of the raw materials and increasing the margin, then we have to start looking at some point for materials that are made at scale very cheaply. And that brings us to plastic fibers because they're just a lot easier to make. They're chemical based. You're extruding those fibers and it's typically done in these massive manufacturing facilities by chemical companies and corporations. Whereas with a natural fiber, you're pretty much relying at some level on a farmer. And that's very often family farmers or ranchers, also crop farmers for the plant fibers, of course. And that is also to a certain extent done at scale, but there's a limiting factor within the environment that we have to live within.
This is so fascinating. So it's kind of like, I say fast food is great if you want to die fast. And the thing about fast fashion is it's convenient and it's cheap, just like fast food. But the problem is these materials aren't going to last as long. So the clothing won't even be worthy of a hand-me-down, right? Mm-hmm. And it's going to end up in some landfill, which isn't good for the world. I mean, there's just so many things to think about that maybe we never thought about in relationship to our clothing before.
Yeah, I think it's not to be too dire. I just think the situation is actually worse than that because we've devalued clothing to such an extent that we buy so much of it. Well, first of all, I don't like to ever put the blame on consumers. I really think it's a problem at a brand level. They're overproducing. And so they're really that root cause where they're putting too much product out into the market and it's not enough for consumers to even consume. And so you see these sales and you see this constant year over year devaluing of fabrics and textiles and garments. And then we have such a problem with waste, from consumer waste as well as overproduction waste. And sometimes it does go to landfill. Sometimes it's incinerated. And then also for the post-consumer, just consumer waste, it ends up getting shipped to other countries and creating a lot of economical issues there. But it's also sometimes burned within that country. So that's, I think, the most egregious to me is that we ship waste and then burn it somewhere else. And because there's such a high level of plastic in that clothing, it's very toxic. So
oh my gosh.
It creates pretty bad environmental and like air pollution situations for other countries.
I'm putting two and two together right now because I've been to the Dominican Republic and to Haiti on work trips, and I have seen truckloads of clothing. And I thought at the time, people must have donated clothing thinking people in Haiti can use this. But actually, it's a surplus, and maybe it was going to go be burned somewhere, honestly. I don't think it was going to a clothing store. It certainly didn't look like it.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, there's just too much clothing. People don't need it anymore, so something has to happen to it. There's nothing to sell. There's nothing to give away. Even with overproduction, this is a common thing with brands, is if they overproduce, sometimes they can donate that excess, that garments, but sometimes they can't for a variety of reasons. It's seconds, maybe it just wasn't made right. Maybe it has their label on it, so there's an issue with donating and devaluing the brand. So there's something that has to happen to that, and that's typically incinerated or landfilled here.
Wow, there's so much to think about. And I appreciate that you don't want to blame consumers, but I also can't help but think of Alan Savory, who talks about a holistic management approach to life. And he says that every decision we make is either a choice that is beneficial for the future or one that may be hindering where we want to go as Team Humanity. And I feel like here's a choice that many of us might not have even thought of before. Where are we getting our clothing and what is it made of? And how does this affect this generation and future generations?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's where consumers need to get to, is they need to start thinking about what they're buying. And it's so easy to just see a very inexpensive t-shirt and just think nothing of it and just buy it. Because, whatever, it was only a couple dollars. What does it matter? But when I'm looking at clothing, what I'm looking at is the feedstock and the raw materials. I'm like, what went into this garment? First of all, is it priced at a price point that seems fair? Because at some level, there's guarantees that there's basically exploitation, whether it's of individuals or communities or the environment. So price matters. And then the other thing is just the raw material makeup. Is it a natural fiber? And the reason that's so important to me is because there's always potential in the natural fibers. I tend to think about sustainability and sustainable fashion. Like, what does this represent for the future? How can we change this system to make it better? And if you're buying plastic or a polyester t-shirt, that can't really provide anything that's good for the world. You're not going to change that into some positive environmental impact because you're extracting oil from the ground to make it. But with natural fibers, they can be managed and grown and harvested in a way that contributes to ecosystems and to livelihoods. And so that potential is there. We just have to change some of those systems behind those fibers.
Using these petroleum byproducts for clothing, isn't good for our world or our planet. But I feel like I go into some athletic stores and they're like, these leggings were made from 100% plastic water bottles. And I'm thinking, is that a good idea too? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they tout it as if it were.
Yeah, I don't think it's a very good idea at all. It's not really where we want to be. It's not creating a positive impact. So I used to work at fashion brands, and I know firsthand too, just because it was my job to collect a lot of these certificates. And I spoke with so many fabric mills around the world who make these fabrics. I think there's a good amount of fraud in these supply chains. I'm not convinced that they're really tracking the volumes of plastic bottles coming in and yoga pants going out. And it's a really hard thing to do that type of analysis. But still, it worries me that there's so much recycled plastic out there in our clothing, and it's being sold as a sustainability initiative. It's not sustainability. If we could somehow figure out that, yes, this is in fact 100%, maybe we can use a tracer in the fiber or something like that and say that this is actually from recycled materials, then okay, that's better, but it doesn't mean we should still be overproducing plastic yoga pants.
Right. And the other thing is, which we were alluding to earlier, to have that plastic against my skin. I mean, let's just face facts. Man-made synthetic fibers are not going to be as breathable or as healthy or as comfortable or as sustainable as clothing that is made from raw materials that are from animals and plants.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're definitely not, but they stretch, and people love stretch. And so that's the battle.
I see. Well, we can't solve that problem right now. So
No.
Let me just pivot and say, how can we know, Megan, if the raw materials used in our clothing, like the ones you've mentioned, leather, wool, silk, cashmere, how can we know if they've even been raised in a way that's of benefit to the land?
Right now, it's really hard, and that's part of the program. That's why Land to Market as a program exists, because we're trying to bring some verification and traceability into the supply chain so that the brands can put a product out for their consumers that a consumer can feel really good about, that they know that this material came from a regenerative farm where they're supporting biodiversity and soil health and farmer livelihood. So that's what we're trying to do, is get that communication to the consumer so that they understand that these raw materials have this potential to actually really restore ecosystems and have animals, and moving those animals around using holistic management, as you mentioned, to really have a highly functioning ecosystem that can thrive rather than having something that's tending towards desertification.
Yeah, so I know the Savory Institute has savory hubs farms that are kind of learning centers around the world that are doing it right, that are doing regenerative agriculture, raising livestock and such that are treated humanely and without antibiotics and all these things. And so they kind of check all the boxes. Is land to market similar in that way? Like, have you found farms or centers that are raising these raw materials, whether they're from an animal or for plants, in a way that is regenerative?
Yeah, so we actually work with all of the ranchers and farmers within the Savory Network. So Land to Market is a program that was started within the Savory Institute. And so how I see it is that we're a sourcing solution for brands. We're a verification program, but we also help them really architect or create these supply chains, starting with the farmer. And when we do that, we're getting those products from the farms to the market. And I see that as an acceleration of the Savory Institute's mission to restore grasslands. And they're really doing that through the holistic management of animals. So we're very connected to the Savory Institute, and the way that we're showing that a farm is actually in the state of regeneration is through a protocol that they developed. It's called ecological outcome verification. And that's how our program is a bit different from other certifications out there in the market. We're looking at outcomes. So we're looking at complete holistic ecosystem health and land health. And we look at different indicators. So there's 15 different indicators that are part of our monitoring protocol. And they're looked at annually through like what we call a monitoring event. But really, it's very much a farmer first program, meaning that the data that's collected is for the farmer to make decisions upon. Can there be tweaks to the management plan to even get like more of those positive outcomes that they want to see on the land? And then we aggregate those numbers through the indicators, and we look at the ecosystem health index, and we're looking for positive trends. So if we see that positive trend, and we're looking at, just be clear, so we're looking at things like indicators of healthy water cycling, healthy mineral cycling, energy flow, like is there enough photosynthesis happening? And then biodiversity, or as we like to say on the Savory side, is community dynamics, which I really like, because it's not just diversity, but it's this interaction between all the different species and components of the ecosystem. So is there abundance? Is there like a thriving cycle of energy, minerals, and water? And if we look at those trends over time and we see that they're increasing, then we would say, okay, that's a regenerative farm. So the materials or the products coming off of that farm are verified and can be shown as verified in the marketplace through our seal.
I see. It reminds me of, we have a 12-spoon restaurant rating program at the Weston A. Price Foundation that's just kind of launching right now. But the idea is people can say, does this restaurant use saturated fats? Are there seed oils in the kitchen? Like things that we don't want and things that we do want to see. And the more of the things that we do want to see, including like, do they sell organ meat? The more they get another spoon. And the idea is they are striving for or learning about, even as they're growing, getting those 12 spoons.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. It's a lot of spoons. But you guys have 15 things, right? So
we're looking at 15 indicators. So we actually look at both leading and lagging indicators. So there's 15 indicators that are leading indicators. So that's why I say that these are farmer first, because it's basically a feedback loop where they have a management plan. They're moving their animals around in this holistic way to get the outcomes that they want. And then they start to look at these indicators, even though it's yearly, you can look at them all the time. I mean, once you start seeing what they are and learning about them, you can't unknow that. So you're kind of always looking for bare ground or signs of soil erosion, or certain plant species. And then every 5 years, we do what's called a long-term monitoring event. And that's when we take more quantitative data sets. So we'll do soil core samples to look at soil organic carbon, soil organic matter, water infiltration tests to see and really understand like how quickly or how slowly does water permeate into the soil. And that's a good sign of, if in a rain event, if that water sinks in really fast, the rain will sink in, and that's great. If it doesn't, then it's a sign the rain will just run off. And through that runoff, you'll get soil erosion, which is what we're trying to prevent.
Absolutely. No, I totally get it. Coming up, Megan discusses why leather can be more sustainable and ethical than pleather products made from petroleum.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Upgraded formulas. Test, don't guess. A lot of us spend a lot on supplements, and we have a cabinet full that we take regularly. But wouldn't it be great to know if what you're doing is actually having the right effect on your body and your performance? And wouldn't it be important also to discern what you were actually absorbing or not absorbing and what you might have too much of in the body? Well, now there's a chance to accurately test all of that with upgraded formulas, upgraded hair test kit, and consultation. You find out exactly what you're missing and what you've got too much of in your system. And by the way, Upgraded Formulas also sells minerals that are super easy to absorb to address some of the heretofore hidden deficiencies that could be affecting your thyroid, your adrenal glands, and much more. I just went through the process myself and I'm thrilled with the result. I sent in my hair sample and got a one-on-one consultation with one of their counselors, and I learned so much about what I can do to make sure my body has the right balance of important nutrients. So check out the test and consultation available at upgradedformulas.com and save 20% on your first purchase with the code WISE at checkout. Go to upgradedformulas.com and again, use the code WISE at checkout. And have you heard about Optimal Carnivore's new Brain Nourish product? It's designed to improve focus, mood, memory, and provide better clarity and creativity. It's a unique, groundbreaking formula made from grass-fed beef brain and lion's mane mushrooms. It's the ultimate whole food nootropic to build a better brain. These two ancestral superfoods have been used for centuries to improve brain function and overall mental well-being, and they're now available for the first time together in convenient capsules. A friend of mine recently texted me and said, Hilda, I can't believe how Brain Nourish has improved my focus. She was thrilled. So you guys check them out today. Go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and you can check out all of Optimal Carnivore's products. And remember that they also plant one tree for every product sold, which also helps the environment. They've got their grass-fed organ complex that contains 9 organs, the grass-fed liver product, and the new Brain Nourish. So go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to receive 10% off all products that you buy. That's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code Weston10. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. And now I'm just putting on my consumer hat for a second. So let's say I'm like, oh my gosh, Megan knows what's going on. I love this land to market approach. How can I find out what fashion groups are using some of the materials from these kind of farms that are doing it right?
Well, we have a number of brands who we're working with. So that's how our program works. We work with food and fiber brands. I mean, I'll just plug our website here. If you want to go to landtomarket.com, we do have a whole brand list. And we're working with a lot of major brands. I think some people where this conversation may sound new, may be surprised with who we're working with. So there's a lot happening. We're doing a lot of assessment right now and really creating these supply chains to get these regeneratively grown materials into the supply chain. So before I worked at Land to Market, I was working at Eileen Fisher, which is a women's clothing brand based in New York. Very progressive, well known for their sustainability initiatives. So I was really lucky that I got to work there on fibers and materials and supply chain transparency. And that's how I really got involved in this whole space, was because I was looking at wool, and we ended up sourcing wool from regenerative farmers that are a part of the Savory Institute in Argentina, and then creating that supply chain and having that fiber shipped to our Italian spinner. And then the garments were made, and that you're supporting regenerative agriculture when you buy that sweater. So that is still in the market. My understanding is that program is still up and running. And that's nice. One great thing. If you're an Eileen Fisher shopper, you can buy their merino wool and you're supporting something really, really great. And then we have other brands who are well in their journey, like Timberland has a number of styles where they're using leather from various ranches in the United States for certain styles. So I think you can look at theirs. You have to kind of dig a little bit, but it's part of their Earth Keeper collection, as you can find those too. Yeah.
Well, this is something new for all of us to consider, because like I just bought recently a leather purse because I wanted quality. I didn't want like pleather, I wanted something that would last.
Yeah.
But it never crossed my mind to think, how was this cow raised, on what kind of conditions? It really didn't cross my mind.
Yeah, I think it doesn't cross a lot of people's minds. And the problem with that is we're starting to see this narrative and this push by some brands in particular that are really driving for leather alternatives. And there's this narrative that leather is just bad. It's a high quality product, but the way that the animals are raised, it's just bad. And that's just so not true. There's so much nuance to that. It can be really harmful, sure. You can have an animal in a feedlot or concentrated animal feeding operation, and that's terrible for the environment. But on the other hand, we have the opportunity to switch that system around and put those animals on pasture and manage them holistically so that you're restoring that relationship between the grassland and the grazer. And when you do that, you see these wonderful outcomes, and the animal really is that tool for regeneration. So as bad as a reputation as leather has, I see it as potentially being one of our most sustainable materials out there, and we should be driving for systems change, not new innovative materials in that space.
I love the concept and the mission of system change. What small steps, Megan, would you recommend that someone do who wants to do exactly that?
I think it's really important to support those regenerative food systems because it's all connected. Mm-hmm. The fibers and the leather and the meat and bone broth and even like tallow-based skincare, it's all connected. So supporting farmers in their journey that's number one. And then if you can support a brand who's supporting them, that's great too, especially from a fashion side, just because the textile supply chains are so long. Mm. And you can seek out some options for product like the ones that I mentioned. You can go to our website. There's other brands too. But I think really engaging in understanding why this is so important for us to restore ecosystems, through proper land management. And you can do that on a local level too. So I would say start with food and then also just continue learning and then thinking about what you're buying in terms of those feedstocks. So are you supporting a natural fiber and that potential for regeneration? Or are you going to buy something that's made of plastic and maybe you want to rethink that? Or at least lower the amount of plastic, because I understand it has purpose, but not for every type of garment.
Now, Megan, what would you say to the skeptic who's like, it sounds good, but just like buying organic, it's much more expensive. I'd rather go to Target or H&M and just pick up 3 T-shirts for $1. I don't know. It's not $1. Let me think. 3 T-shirts for $10, and that's better for my family. What would you say to them?
To a certain extent, I agree and I empathize with that. I think about holistic management and you have to do what's right for your own context. And if that's where you are, that may be necessary and that's fine. But I don't think we should use it as a distraction. So I don't really love that argument when it comes up in meetings or in talks, because it's sort of a distraction from where we need to go, because we are trying to think about systems change. And like, for example, let's use H&M. If we can get them to engage in regenerative and actually fundamentally change their supply chains, and if they can still keep the costs low somehow, it's questionable, but it might have to go up a little bit. But if that's all that's offered, then we're starting to create more value in our garments again. Because these are pretty complicated products. They go through an entire, you have to harvest them. They go through that whole harvest cycle. Someone has to do that. The fiber is cleaned. It has to be combed or carded, spun into yarn, dyed at some point, knit or woven into a fabric, and then cut and sewn into a garment. These are lengthy supply chains. There are a lot of costs along the way. So while I don't think it should just be 3 shirts for $10, if we can get to a point where people can still afford a T-shirt if they need it, and they're supporting these regenerative systems and not supporting the exploitation of the workers or the environment, then that's where we need to get to. But I think we have to change the whole system and not worry about it from an individual point of view, because it's not going to change overnight.
Right. And one thing I think of too, especially for families on a budget, is buying things at a thrift store, buying things secondhand, because you're at least saving it from the landfill. And sometimes you can find products made of cashmere and wool and legitimately good materials, even secondhand.
Sometimes even better. I mean, I like thrift shopping. I probably don't do it enough. I don't shop as much these days though. But I think that's always a great option. And the way that clothing used to be made used to be higher quality. I mean, that's an overgeneralization, but I think that is a trend. One of the dangerous things that I've seen in fast fashion is not that there's fast fashion and then slow fashion. That's not really a binary that exists. It's that fast fashion has moved the entire industry just a little bit closer to the bottom. And then where everyone's now trying to lower cost of goods and make sure that they have that healthy financial margin. And so it's created, I think, a lot of issues industry-wide. And another reason why we're seeing this uptick Like, for example, in polyester, because it's not just that there's more fast fashion companies, it's because everyone's now trying to compete with them.
Oh, so in other words, if my competitor is using polyester in their shorts and they're undercutting me price-wise, then I'm going to start doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So lots happening in that system. And just like with the food system, again, as Alan would say, every choice we make is either creating the future that we want or it's creating a future that we don't want. So we have to be really careful. One thing we haven't talked about very much, but I alluded to earlier was the feel of the natural fabrics. I have a friend who isn't super well health-wise, and she can tell if the material is a natural fiber or not. Isn't that interesting? Just by putting it on her body, she'll break out like in a rash if it has polyester. Isn't that interesting?
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's terrible.
I know, but she's like the canary in the coal mine, Megan. So I think we would all do better, not just for the earth and big picture things, but even for our own bodies to clothe ourselves with fabrics that breathe, that are more natural.
Absolutely. I think natural fibers are great. I personally love wool, kind of obsessed with wool, but I just love to wear it too, like, against your skin. I think it's much healthier for your skin. Now, I don't want to be naive though. There's also, sometimes we'll find natural fibers that are blended with spandex or polyester or nylon. And you also have to take into consideration the chemistry that was used in the processing and dyeing of those fibers. So just because it's natural doesn't mean it's perfect, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
Wow. Well, this has been fascinating. Of course, we'll have links to Landamarket's work and the website and all the things in the show description. And I want to ask you now, as we wrap up, if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, Megan, what would you recommend that they do?
I'm not sure that I should be giving this advice, but I guess the one thing that I try to tell myself, because I work basically at a computer all day, is to just get outside and get some sunlight and at least for a little bit each day, especially on those days where you're just in back-to-back meetings. So I think getting outside and getting some sunshine.
I love it. And I just did that today. So I'm with you. We're on the same page.
I did too.
So thank you for this conversation, Megan. I really appreciate it. And it's been giving me at least a lot of food for thought.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Our guest today was Megan Meiklejohn. Check out the landtomarket.com website for more information on sustainable living. And I'm Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of the podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Christelle708 says this: such great information. Varied topics with knowledgeable guests. Information is practical, and I always learn something I can apply to my life. Christelle, thank you so much for your review. It means a lot, and it can attract potential listeners. Feel free to go to Apple Podcasts and also rate and review the show. Give us as many stars as you like, and tell the world what you think. And thank you so much for listening, my friends. Stay well. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.